Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Conscious Conversations. We're going to take a few minutes and let everyone come, and then we'll get started in just a few moments.
It'd be nice if they had some like
a little theme song. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, a little theme song.
Conversation.
Okay.
Conscious conversations. Conscious conversations. Because you need to join.
Okay.
Conversations.
I love it.
All right, welcome everyone to Conscious Conversations, powered by Brown Girl Theory. I am one of your hosts, Whitney Ghaffari. I am a master coach and marketing strategist and owner of Soul Cult Business Cultivation for the Conscious Community. I am joined by my amazing, beautiful co-hosts, Narate Yopis, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so grateful and excited to be here. My name is Narate Yopis. I am CEO of Nourishing Nature, which is a soul-centered coaching and indigenized retreat company. I am excited to have this conversation and to have our special guest here to join us. So shall we dive in?
Yes. We are joined by special guest, Shateja Griffith. Welcome. And I'm going to let people know exactly who you are, because you're not just Shateja Griffith. Is a real bad bitch. And she's doing it the most. She's incredible. And so I want to take a moment to actually share her bio with you all. Shateja Griffith holds a BA in Contemplative Psychology with a concentration in Transpersonal and Humanistic Psychology from Naropa University. A Navy veteran and queer Black woman, Shateja has always been faced with the disrespecting reality that this country was not created for her. She intimately understands what is required to restructure narratives in order to learn and grow authentically and joyously. She indulges her passions for astrology, poetry, and spirituality as a means of creating space to be her authentic self. Growing up in Quincy, Illinois, after having been born in the Bronx, New York, informed Shateja's perspective on the power of predominantly white communities to systematically hinder the growth and understanding of people of color. She now grounds her activism in anti-racism work through exploring generational trauma and the lives and experiences of queer and Black communities. Shateja, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. I'm so honored to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Were you about to say
something? Go for it. Girl, you go for it. I was just about to say, let's dive into this awesome topic that I'm super excited to delve into. It's super important. And we're just, again, grateful to have you here, Shateja, to lead this conversation with us and bring it into new perspective for others. And yeah.
Community. So one of the reasons why I thought that you would be such a great guest is because I had the honor of sitting and listening to a talk that you gave as an alumni of Naropa University. And that whole reason for the Sparks Talks, I understand, was all based around community and what that actually meant. Can you share with us, when you were asked to participate or you decided that you wanted to throw your hat in the ring and say, yes, I want to be a part as a public speaker, what was the driving force behind that? And why does this topic really spark an interest for you?
Yeah. Well, one of my friends, Christopher Rochelle, works at Naropa's alumni coordination group area. Department, yeah. And he was like, oh my God, you should do this quarter's Spark Talks, because it was very much around Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community, and that concept. But as I went through the practices and was noticing that I'm kind of the only person that's talking about the deep, very real reality of what communities of color are going through, as opposed to oh, hey, we're going to talk about beloved community here at Naropa, and it's going to be very Naropa.
Which, hold up, for people who are viewing and may not know what
Naropa is.
Naropa University it's based in Boulder. It's very much a Buddhist-inspired thought college. The thing is, though, it can get very spiritual bypassy, and people just be like, "Oh, if you just raise your vibration, everything's just gonna get better," and you can't do that because that's skipping steps in like the actual work of recognizing, like, oh, like, do I have toxic patterns? Am I perpetuating the patriarchy? Like, am I perpetuating capitalism? Am I perpetuating fat phobia? Like, all of that. And it gets very swept under the rug, and people don't want to acknowledge, like, you've got actual work to do, and you can't just put on a third eye pendant or like harem pants. Like, all of a sudden, like, oh, all the work is done. Okay, I'm enlightened.
I've transcended.
Exactly. I am no longer part of this 3D experience.
Yeah.
So
I think just to tip off that, like, when we do that, we're missing all of the learning experiences, right? The real enlightenment, so to say, or but yeah, we miss all of the real experiences, and so that's like really important. But yeah, that has definitely, I went to Naropa, saw it there a lot. Yeah, we all went to
for our audience. That's how we all know each other. Actually, all Naropa alum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I definitely saw that as a problem at Naropa, and so I'm really grateful that you saw it and were able to address it through this platform.
Oh yeah, and don't get me wrong. This wasn't the only occurrence of like, oh wow, we're just gonna ignore what's actually happening. Okay, that's awesome, because Naropa got some work to do. Like, don't get me wrong, its underlying potential is great, but we can't fall into the potential trap and every single thing. So
yeah, the intention that they're going for is great,
but the impact.
We gotta talk about that impact. Can't leave out that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So you were invited to participate because obviously we needed to have your perspective. And as someone who did sit and get a chance to watch this, I noticed that you were the only person of color who was there to speak about their perspective of a beloved community. And you were mentioning that, like, as you were just watching the development, like, what was that like?
Honestly, I was like, it didn't really dawn on me, because like always being the one Black girl in most situations is just like a regular thing. So I didn't really peep it until like the day of, and I was like, oh shit, I'm the only Black girl at a beloved community talk, which is inspired by a Black man. And I was like, this is really interesting. Was it me being tokenized? I'm not 100% sure. Like, I haven't really thought into that, but it definitely could be. But I think also, like you said, it was very much like needing to be that person to talk about what's really going on. Because like we mentioned, Norma doesn't want to do that. Like, it's not that they don't. It's just that they're not including the right people to be having these conversations. And even if they do have people of color on the community, they're doing a million other things that are very much related to diversity trainings and inclusivity and these specific kind of conversations. So yeah.
It's exhausting when you have to be the only person who's willing to speak up and give your perspective when it seems like the point continuously is getting missed. And there's okay, so as a viewer watching, I listened to these different speeches being given, and they're talking about, we have to just look at these ideologies that Martin Luther King had, like he had this whole 6-step system, and here's what is it transitioning?
it's some type of transitioning something. It's something. He kept using amphicene.
I'm not familiar with that.
I'm not sure, but it was very much like, and that was his specific business model, and I think as well as like a foundation that he's using as a business function. Of like, we have similar, like we were saying, similar pathways, similar ideologies, and he talked about it being very much like a non-violent, like really stressing the non-violent part, and I'm just like, I find it really interesting that that's always the part that people want to hit on. It's like, oh, we have to make sure that we're not causing harm. And like, obviously, yes, like nobody wants to intentionally cause harm. But in the process of trying to undo over 400 years of oppression on mostly minority groups, some people gonna get their feelings hurt. Like, it's really, at the end of the day, like you can't tiptoe around like, hey, you have some internal work that you need to do, and my topic's going to talk about it. It's not just going to up and evaporate just because you don't want to see it.
Yeah, that is so true. I am really curious about your perspective on, because you're right, people want to talk about like, oh, no, nonviolence. We should be, everyone's got a critique. Let me just summarize that. Everyone's got a critique on how people should voice their grievances and how things should be done. But if we're coming back to the topic of community and like what that really means, what does direct action to you mean? You know, you are a community activist, you are a leader, and you are someone who has sat and watched, you know, all the different strategies unfold. And I know that you've done so much research, so much research. You know, like what do you say to the people who want things delivered in such a nice silver platter, but then want to critique?
Yeah.
Speak your mind on that.
Most times, because as an example, I had to cut off an old friend because they were very much like, I don't like that it's happening this way. I don't like that people are being violent. I don't like that they're destroying things. And I was like, you're really equating people dying, people being murdered in the street to property value and things that are not really that important. Like, well, so-and-so owns this. And I hear this a lot from even like the Black community of like, well, why are we destroying like our neighborhoods and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, I hear you. And also we don't own any of that. Like we built it and got nothing from it. So if we demolish it, we can build something that actually benefits us and benefits the entire community and not just those who are very much profiting off of a capitalistic structure. So there's that. And very much like, it's like a general annoyance of like, oh, I can't show up authentically as I am because it makes you uncomfortable. And sitting with that is very much like, I don't know if we can be friends because you're not allowing people to actually show up with their anger, with their rage. Because this isn't just us. Like, this isn't just like our generation who's been experiencing this. This is multiple generations who have been trying to figure out, okay, how do we fix this? How do we fix this? How do we fix this? And we're just not acknowledging like the initial standpoint of like, this country was built off of racism and capitalism and the patriarchy. Like, we cannot move forward until those things have been demolished, defunded, and a new system that benefits everyone, including those who are in minority groups. Like, you can't, you have to address that. Like, you have to allow people to be able to express themselves in a way that they need to.
Stemming point of like community. Like, if you're going to call yourself a community, who are you counting and including in your definition of a community? Because if you have done the socially acceptable, you know, silent boycotts, you know, if you've just been marching in the street, which are peaceful protests, which everybody has been doing for how long? if you've done that, if you've written your senator, you've written your governor, you've written all these different things, you have, you know, asserted your rights in a peaceful way when pulled over by the police or whatever. If you've done all of these things that are set forth as the appropriate ways to exercise your civil rights, then what's next?
Right.
What's next? And obviously the powers that be and those who are continuing to support the powers that be, if you aren't listening to the cries for help, the cries of change, then who is your community?
Right.
Who gets to then have a say? And I think that's the most frustrating part of just being a community member of all the communities, is sitting back and listening to people say like, well, but you need to do it this way, or oh, you gotta do it that way, blah, 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 blah. And like, okay, but we've tried all of that.
Every single way that you could have possibly been like, oh, okay, we'll do it this way. Okay, we did it that way. Okay, we'll do it the Martin Luther King way, do it the nonviolent way. We did it that way. Okay, we'll do it the Malcolm X way. We'll fuck shit up. We did that, and like none of the ways are working. Colin Kaepernick, Neil, that still wasn't good enough.
Which was the most appropriate. I'm sorry to cut you off. Because that is something from like day one has really irked me, that before, like, kneeling during a patriotic whatever, like that is actually a form of respect, a respectful, like, not about it. Like that is a very respectful thing, and it's been acknowledged. And so for this person to decide that, like, you know what, the best thing I can do to just show that, like, I'm not for this, but I'm gonna respectfully, like, decline,
right,
you know, say in my Pledge of Allegiance or whatever that is, to kneel. And then that becomes an uproar of like, you're disrespecting, you need to just do your job, you need to like, like how is saying no thank you a form of unpatriotism, when that is actually the most patriotism thing that you can do, is to say, you know what, I don't agree, because that's exactly how our country was founded.
But even then, I can't even say that I'm surprised if people are like, oh, this is unpatriotic of what you're doing, because anytime you try to ask questions, as we were watching earlier, like even like you take it back to the Salem witch trials, where women were literally like, I want to question this, like I don't know, but what is this? What was it? Puritanism. Like I want to question Puritanism, and even then that led to multiple people being hung, like children, women, most women. Older women were hung and burned alive at the stake. Like, it's all
because they were medicine women, because they were medicine men, because they were medicine people. Like, and they didn't fit the patriarchal or the whatever society was trying to label as the right way.
Right.
I mean, and that's what we see in community. If you're privileged and you know things don't, doesn't matter to me because I'm looking at this narrow, you know, everything works for me. So like they all have an opportunity. They're just not using it. You know, it become like they're not actually seeing what community is, or they kind of I feel like no matter what, right? If it's peaceful protest, if it's not, if it's this, if it's that, something's always going to be, something's always going to be. Because people aren't going to agree with the methods no matter what. And so I'm curious too, what does that mean for us, you know, for people who really want to create change and build community? There's so many blocks, you know, obstacles that we have to work with. It's just, I mean, where do we go from here to build a better space for the next generations that come?
Yeah, I think as you're speaking more of the non-people of color, I think it's really about like them acknowledging their past. I just shared a post through Siblings in the Struggle collective yesterday about epigenetics and post-traumatic stress syndrome, and just looking at epigenetics and learning like what your lineage is, learning where your people came from, who were your ancestors, because that will tell you probably terrible things that they did that's got passed on down to you that you need to heal. That way, like, you can allow whatever work that needs to be done, like, to naturally flow through you. So that's my perspective of, like,
So then,
what could we be doing.
yeah. Oh, I love that we're getting into this. This is my favorite thing, talking about healing,
Everything always
talking
comes
about intergenerational trauma.
Right,
But like what I've kind of, as a coach and working with people, what I've realized is the willingness, the willingness to forgive. That is the hardest part, because what I, in my experience and work and my personal experience of healing, and then also working with others, it's the validation that people fear of losing when they forgive. There's like the validation of, like, no, this happened and I can't let it go. And it's not necessarily about forgetting or letting go, but it's the emotional hold that these experiences, that the trauma of our ancestors have gone through. It's the forgiving, and not the forgetting of it, but because we don't necessarily, what an elder reminded me, it's like we don't forget the actions, but we forgive the essence of people, like this the spirit within people. That is what we are forgiving. Does that make sense? But it's hard. Like, I feel like it's the willingness to do that, and the acceptance of what comes after, that I've experienced, again, in my healing journey, and then working with others. That's the hardest part, specifically, with working with people of color, because there is so much emotion and heartache that comes with our ancestors and the history of our ancestors.
Yeah. And it becomes really difficult, I think, for us as a community to move into that space. I don't think that it's a matter of, like, us not wanting to. But it becomes really, really hard. And I understand where that struggle comes from when you have people who are the descendants of the perpetrators, who are inheriting all of the privilege, all of the gains, all of everything that allowed them to behave this way, they're reaping all of the benefits of. And so when you are continuously bumping up against that system that supports that, and you have people who are willing to acknowledge that they're benefiting and they're profiting and everything has been built around their experience, then it is really hard to be able to let that go, because it's like, okay, well, I want to move past it, but damn, you keep throwing this back in my face everywhere I turn around. Like, whether like, just from the moment you wake up, everything that you were confronted with when you were a person of color, it is a continuous reminder, because you are bumping up against someone else or some other institution that is representing that pain. And if you don't have anyone acknowledging it, it's hard to let that go. And I really wish, my biggest wish for non Black people and non people of color, just to do that work, so that you can heal. So that way, if you want to understand, and I know that like 2020 has definitely brought up that narrative of all the people who are flocking to new allyship and people who are wanting to learn. It's, I'll never understand, but I will do better. Like, no shade and you wanting to do your thing, and I appreciate that. But part of understanding is actually going and doing that own journey work and going back to your roots, because then you find that empathy. Then you actually see the greater scale of what that impact, has been. And it's that continuous unwillingness. And I think that that's what makes it hard. But I'm so glad I've embraced my own journey, because I recognize that continuing to carry that, like, that's not for me. That doesn't support that doesn't support where I'm going. And I really hope that more of us within our community, take on that invitation to heal and to, go back to our roots. And I really invite everybody that is non-Black to also do the same.
Yeah.
That's how we gonna see this change, y'all.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the individual work that also, will lead to building of the whole of the community.
So true, because it does take just one person showing up differently.
Yeah.
It takes, you literally have to be that change, as cliche as that is. Be the change you want to see. But like, for real though.
It literally is though.
Yeah. You gotta be that change.
There's really no other way around that. Like,
Yeah.
if you really want things to change, you have to embody that. Like, it has to exude through your pores of like, okay, I don't want going back to what you were saying about the way that community is set up is very much more in favor of non-POC. Okay, so let's make the community look a little more POC. Let's make the community look a little more queer instead of taking away the rights.
Can't talk about that.
I know, we're about to get into a good side.
Like, it has to look more indigenous. It has to look more Latina, like the Latino. Like, it has to encompass everything. It has to look non-binary. It has, like, you can't, it's going straight into the conversation about spectrum.
Yeah.
And your community should be on a spectrum.
Mm. Mm. Ooh, I'm gonna let that sit.
I know. It's like, I definitely see it, like I'm reflecting, where I see this. And especially with working with people, especially in the healing world, it's like I've, had to set boundaries. Like, I'm sorry, I cannot be a part of your thing you have here because there's no representation. This is not speaking to my community, But yeah, that is really important on all aspects, in schools and in all the different places.
Especially in school, like not even like college. That's like the ground education, like kindergarten, like K through 12.
Yeah.
Like, you're like you're having to have conversations about like why, like what's going on right now, like between the pandemic and the protests and the rallies and all that. Like, you can't really just lean on the one Black kid in class who may live in a more urban or rural neighborhood to answer all your questions, or like maybe updating the history book so it is like the white man is Captain Savaho. But ruined a lot of lives, like a lot of generations, a lot of people. But yeah, it has to start from the ground up. Like, every institution that stands has to be redone.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed.
When I don't understand anyone who does not understand that, simply because everything is based off of colonization. Like, every system was introduced into this land and then globally via colonization. So if everything stems from colonization, then it would stand to reason that if we're going to build an inclusive society, that we must decolonize all of the practices and all of the ways in which we do things, the way in which we handle business, the way in which we are doing health and healing, the way in which we're building our communities. I think like one of even the most, anybody who has ever lived or is currently living in a multifamily unit or has lived in like an apartment complex, I think you definitely understand, my thought process and my train of thought of where I'm going with this is that housing is built around a nuclear family concept. And so from the room sizes, from the bathrooms, from the living spaces, everything is built on this idea that there is going to be this mommy and this daddy, and they're going to have like, their one or two kids and like their blah, blah, blah. And reality, because of the generations before us, really did some, great things with the economy and set us up for success. So therefore, most people in their early 20s and 30s are not able to actually afford a home. So that means that you are dating and you are having housemates and you're living more together. But that's so difficult when you only create a living situation where there's like only one bedroom suite that has like a bathroom, or like there's only one room with a big closet, and when you're not actually thinking of people, multiple people, different generations living underneath the roof. And yet we are still continuously building housing units that reflect a nuclear family instead of
Yeah.
what like actual life looks like for people. And that's
Yeah.
just one example.
Mhm.
You know, it's
Yeah.
so we have to decolonize. We have to think about communal, like living in community, and whether that's communal living in like a structural sense, or it's actually how are we building our neighborhoods. You know, are we putting them next to resources?
Right.
Do we have parks? Do we have green spaces? Do we have public transportation?
Food.
You know, like
Yeah.
how are
Like
you designing
food that's like nutritious?
Yes, and
Let me
not
specify.
yes, and not only making nutritious food available,
Yeah.
you know, in certain areas. It
Yeah.
goes all the way down to literally city planning, and you know, gotta decolonize it.
Yeah.
I mean, especially speaking
Mhm.
about what you were saying about the bedrooms, like
Mhm.
recognizing that even in houses or in apartments, like the reason it was called master bedroom was because that's where the enslaved owners lived.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
there was in most cases, in most houses, like you'll see there's a back door, and that is
Mhm.
because that is where enslaved people had to come in and out of. Like they weren't allowed to come through the front door.
Mhm.
Like
The
there's so
butler's
many-
pantry,
yeah,
which is
Yeah.
let's be real.
mm-hmm.
I,
Like it's so
Yeah.
it's deeper than people really think of. Like
yeah.
I'm making sure I'm not saying the N-word, and I'm making sure that I'm not, you know, using like very basic things. Like
Mhm.
you're not using AAEV, like not perpetuating, not like tokenizing, not doing those things, but it's also like it's in the structures of everything.
It's in our everything. The language,
Yeah.
master bedroom, all of these things. Whitney and I were having this conversation a couple weeks ago. I was like, we gotta change these words. Like it's crazy how it's so unconscious, and we're just kind of falling into it, and have no idea.
Yeah, it's very much like the languaging of things, and going back to the talk that I did, I tried to touch on as much as I could, but it's such a deeper,
It wasn't right.
Yeah, a deeper conversation. Like it's down to the psychology of a human being.
Yes.
The Willie Lynch papers is very much like talking about the creation of a slave, and people. It's arguable that like people will say that people like us today now are very much slaves to the things that we are in. And that's also a reason why it's so hard to deconstruct and decolonize, because we are so fully embedded in the systems that are. But
by design.
Exactly. It's very much like keep you focused on this. You're only worried about this. And then the Willie Lynch papers, it's very much like the blueprint of how to keep a slave for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you have to undo. The point I was trying to make was that he talked about once you strip people of their language, they have nothing left. And in that, what we're talking about now is like, okay, well, if we strip our language, our very colonized language, what do we have? You know, and it's like it's hard to even think about. It's like, oh, if I stop saying these things, like. What else am I?
No. Oh, and we're back.
Okay.
You guys are frozen.
Yeah.
Okay, you're back.
Or can you see us? Can you hear us? Oh no.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, right.
Didn't know where I got cut off. But yeah, very much like once you remove this part of your language, you know, what are you going to have left? Like, how do you rebuild? It's very much an unlearning process consistently. So it's a lot of work, and that's the part about it is like people are so terrified of doing the work to decolonize their language, to decolonize even the food. I like the food of like enslaved people literally taking scraps of what they have and turning it into something, and like having to well done their meat to make sure that there isn't bacteria that's gonna, you know, injure them or poison them, and that would lead into not being able to do their job. So it's rooted in, it's so deep. It's like,
I mean, I really think it's important what you brought up too about like being in economic servitude, like with jobs, like people. I mean, it is just, it breaks my heart to like have conversations with people where they're working, you know, 9 to 5 or even more, and they hate their job. They hate it. They're completely stressed out. They're like, they have no energy. And I'm just like, we're continuously in the cycle. We're still feeding the cycle, but there's so much fear because, oh, if I don't do this, I can't survive. I can't feed. I don't have the resources I need to pay for this house, to pay for, you know, all of these things. And it's literally the same cycle and people just have no awareness of it.
Yeah, that whole notion of living paycheck to paycheck that a lot of us find ourselves in, you know, like you mentioned before, like it's by design. It's by design to keep people in an economical stressful situation. Whatever. Y'all know what I'm saying.
Very much like the rat wheel or whatever they call it, the hamster wheel. You know, like, okay, well, I've got this check now. I have to make sure I pay rent, get some groceries. All right, well, that check is gone.
Yeah.
You pay it again, I do it again. And you pay it and I do it again, and it's continual. And
absolutely.
We can't afford to, you know, have property to, you know, anything. It's because we're completely living paycheck to paycheck.
You can't have,
and it kind of stems. Yeah, I was gonna say it kind of stems back to what you were pointing on earlier, Whitney, with the oh, hello. With the resources, like there are people who, you know, generations have generational wealth. And so they can do all these things. But yeah.
Absolutely. And then that happens without a thought. Like then you have that you have that ideology that comes from those people who come from the generational wealth of like, well, all you have to do is just do XYZ. All you have to do is, you know, like, why can't you just borrow the money from your grandparents? Why can't you just do this? Why can't you just do that? Like, what do you mean you don't have a savings account? Well, you got that wealth, you know, passed down. And when, you know, we didn't get the 40 acres and the mule, like you know, like at bare minimum, but like there was nothing to set us up for success. And when the enslaved people were finally emancipated, that money, like the government paid these plantation owners. Oh, sorry, y'all. Hold on just a second. Go.
And welcome to Yadi's channel.
Yeah. Welcome to Yadi's conversation. What you got to say, Yadi?
Yadi really feels deeply about this topic, and sometimes he just gets really expressive. Anyway, you know, like when you have people, a lot of that generational wealth, not only from like the money that was made from owning humans, but then when the government is paying you for your lost property, then like that's why your family is set up.
And then even it goes back to why y'all think property is more important than people.
Exactly.
On top of that leads into the bootstrap mentality. Like, well, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You just need to get to the grindstone. And like, grinding is not healthy, nor is it sustainable. I shouldn't have to grind. Life should not be this complicated. It should not be this hard. Like, people should be allowed. Like, I mean, just even looking at like Switzerland, very much like European thought values, just like a very more community and way less individualized. Like you actually care and you take care of the people who are producing things for
Yeah.
you. Like you're going to maintain a capitalistic system, which they very much are. At least like you get paid parental leave, but you have kids. You know, people are making at least $2,000 a month. Like even going into the stimulus check, people have been getting consistent stimulus checks since the coronavirus started. But yet here in America, we've only gotten one, and then we have a hard time understanding why there are so many homeless people, or why POC communities are heavily affected because the health industry is terrible. Like the insurance rates are astronomical. Like people can't even afford insulin because it's like
$1,000 for insulin. Like, are you kidding?
Just horrible. I mean, yeah, going to the health system, we got a whole nother situation. Okay? A whole nother situation. Yeah, I mean, honestly, when it comes down to it, the whole systematic shit that's happening is not serving community, does not serve community.
Absolutely. And so who do we vote for? Like, because if it's not serving all of the people, if it's not serving all of the people, then who is it serving?
1%.
Yeah. But like for real though, like how I just heard about this law that got passed in Texas. So at the Board of Social Workers in the state of Texas, what the fuck are y'all doing? Like for real though, what are y'all doing? The Board of Social Workers had a private meeting and they unanimously passed a law that will remove the protections of the disabled community, those who are differently abled, and the LGBTQIA community. The Board of Social Workers, like that's your main job. So if you're not even going to protect vulnerable populations, who are you there to protect then?
100%.
Like community, like what is the definition of community? Right. I mean, mind blown.
And they know, like you see it. There are people who are like questioning, you know, the people that are like, well, why do we have to do it this way? You know, isn't there like a more inclusive way? Isn't there a more sustainable way? Energy efficient, environmental friendly way? You know, like there are people in all of these departments in these systems and institutions that are asking these questions, but they've asked them so many times and nobody's given them an answer. They're like, well, what's the point? You know, might as well continue pushing what they've already got.
So who are you listening to?
Horrible.
You know, when I think about community, I think about, you know, the physical structures and I think about the people that make it up. And, you know, those people who make it up, for me, I have, since I was a little kid, I'm so grateful that I had the privilege of being able to be raised in a home where my mom worked at the university. And so we got to be host families for international students. And that was the coolest thing because I got a chance to be raised around different cultures. I got a chance to learn about people who were different from me. And I recognize that not everybody has access to, you know, that kind of environment, but what that built in me at a young age was the desire for diversity. Like I want to walk down the street and I want to hear different languages being spoken. I want to see people who don't look like me and I want to see people who do look like me. I want to see the 50 shades of brown and the 50 shades of, you know, fair skin. Like I want to see people who are differently abled. I want to live amongst people. And I think about, you know, like the different abilities to access different resources. Community to me is inclusive. And maybe that's just because I'm someone who happens to be of a minority background. I'm someone who is a queer woman. I have so many intersecting identities that for me, it just makes sense. It's just obvious. But if other people took a moment to think about like what are all of your identities, would you not want to see that reflected?
Right.
Would you not want to be amongst that? I don't know. And if I hear that someone in my community is hurting or they're not getting the same amount of resources or they are just living in some part of lack, well, then I'd want to do whatever I could to be able to repair that, to provide that. So it's so baffling when we start looking at the political system on a grander scale. When I walk out my door and I look at what my reality of community, not my envisioned reality, but the lived reality, there's such a huge separation. And I just really want everybody to walk away from this conversation today really questioning, like, what does community mean to you, and what is it that you want to see, and does your reality actually reflect that? Like this. Yeah, those are my thoughts. Those are my feelings.
I think that was a good wrap up. Here is the gift.
Here is the bow.
The takeaway.
The conversation with the bow.
Very nicely done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I do what I can. I have a lot of thoughts.
Awesome.
I try to censor most of them, but
especially leading into not leading, but ending off with putting the pin in intersectionality.
Yeah.
As that all POC are not the same. Like,
can you say that one more again for the people in the back? For the people in the back, especially since you wrote a beautiful poem that started with like, "I don't want to be your resource."
Yeah.
Like, which Shatasia, whoa.
Like, a poem.
You need to let these people know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not all POC are the same. Like, you can't expect all POC or the POC that you meet to have the same experience as somebody else that you know as a person of color, because they're not the same. So when one person of color is saying like, "Hey, I want to maintain my queer rights," and another person of color is like, "Why haven't we gotten land back yet?" You know, like there are so many different pieces that go into this puzzle that you have to look at the whole picture, because you're not gonna get it. Maybe that's what's one of the things why people don't get it, because you're not looking at the whole picture.
They only want to look at the piece that's familiar, warm, and cozy. Absolutely. Well, Shatasia, thank you so much for being a guest, for bringing your insights, your wisdoms, your perspectives to the table. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. If people want to keep up with the work that you're doing she's a poet. So if people want to know about your poetry.
No, you better own it. You better own it.
Own your identities, Shatasia. If people want to stay up to date with the things that you're involved in, how can people follow you?
Yeah, I am on Instagram at The Seventh Alchemist. That is TH7 Alchemist.
Wait, okay.
THE at The Seventh Alchemist.
I don't know if I'm right in this. Okay. Did I spell alchemist correct? Okay. All right, y'all. I'm putting it in the chat, and then I'm going to show it up on screen so that you can see how to follow Shatasia at The Seventh Alchemist on IG. Did I spell
Instagram?
Okay, on Instagram.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Oh.
It is.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. I am your host, Whitney Ghaffari. Again, I'm a master coach and marketing strategist. We're working to decolonize the title. Don't come for me. Don't come for me. My business is all decolonizing business, but we're trying to figure it out. Because it's a learning process. I'm owner of Soul Cult Business Cultivation for the Conscious Community. You can visit my website at whitneyghaffari.com. And Narete, how can people stay up to date with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at YoPeaceGirl. And then my website is nourishingnature.co, nourishingnature.co. And again, I'm a soul-centered coach and wisdom traditions practitioner. So if you're looking to work on healing intergenerational trauma, learning how to work with big emotions, working through conflict, please hit me up on my website or Instagram, as well as I have a couple workshops coming up. So this coming weekend, it's Halloween, but it is the Heartfire Festival, and I will be teaching a workshop on the 5 elements coming from the Chinese philosophy. So if you want to learn more about nature-based practices, wisdom practices, go ahead and join. It's a free event. They have workshops and wisdom elders from all over the earth coming together to share their wisdom. It's going to be pretty beautiful, as well as musicians. So you got Trevor Hall, who will be headlining, and then of course a bunch of other wonderful artists. And then also on the 8th, so November 8th, I'm going to be teaching an I Ching workshop. So I Ching is based off of Chinese divination. So it's from our ancestors, our Chinese ancestors. So if you're looking again to work through conflict, learn how to work with big emotions, this is a great way to have insight and reflect using the I Ching. So those are 2 workshops that are coming up. So I invite you to check those out. And again, thank you, Sateja, for joining us. Thank you, my beautiful Whitney, for being here and leading this with me. We're so grateful and excited to see what our next conversation bubbles forth.
Yes. Everyone enjoy the rest of your week. Have a safe holiday this weekend, and we will see you next month.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.